Pretty weird show, huh? Well, I guess life can be pretty weird altogether. My name is Matthew, and this is Story Time. I'm so excited for this segment and to share my work with you. I'm going to start landing the plane a bit with a little bedtime story. Or, well, a story, all the same. Let's see what we got here. Right. This one is a Greek tale. Classic, right? Not all of the stories I'm going to share are myths, but I wanted to start off with an oldie but a goodie. This is about Daphne the Naiad. Now, a naiad is a type of water nymph, a natural spirit that presides over the babbling brooks, flowing fountains, and other running waters. Local cults revere them as essential to life. Daphne was a naiad of the river Ladon. She spent her days whispering to the bubbles and chasing the freshwater fish up and down the streams. Her favorite tree to perch on was a laurel tree. She would perch above the humans, watching them giggle through the woods and play. The life of a naiad was a fluid life, filled with rain and steam and winter's ice. Then one day, the great lute-playing Olympian Apollo took note of her and became quite fixated. The Roman poet Ovid claims Apollo was struck by Cupid's arrow of love, the oldest excuse in the book. Apollo stood before the base of her favorite tree and pleaded for her hand. He played the lute and sang softly of her flowing hair, her flowery features, and her form. Giggling, she refused his advances. Upon this refusal, Apollo's soft, doting expression wrinkled into a sneer of cold contempt. "You will be my bride," he called out as he began scaling the tree. Now, this, for very good reason, freaked Daphne out. She's like, okay, yeah, I'm out of here, and begins spiriting across the island. She burrowed in the mud and blended in with the frogs. She turned to vapor and hung in the sky like a cloud. She dove into the water and sought purchase on the tongue of an oyster. But wherever she went, Apollo followed, using the light of the morning sun to seek her out even into the night. My life was once filled with foam from the fountain and the conversation with the canaries and doves. Now it is a constant flight, with constant fear, pursued by Apollo constantly, she lamented. And through the wood, she could hear him shout, "Daphne, my bride!" So Daphne crouched low and spoke with the soil. She prayed to the earth for protection from her pursuer. She sought peace and solidarity. And as Apollo broke through the tree line and gained sight of her, she lost sensation in her limbs. Coarse bark grew rapidly over her breasts. Her hair sprouted into leaves, her arms into thin branches. Her feet, so swift a moment ago, became rooted into the earth. And slowly, her face was lost in green and gold until only her glimmering beauty was left. Apollo stood before the newly formed laurel tree, disappointed but still undeterred. "If you will not be my bride, then you will be my tree, and I will use your branches to wreath my lute, my lure, and the locks of my hair." And he formed a crown with the laurel branches. Afterward, he dashed into the sky, seeking another beauty to pursue. And below stood Daphne, growing in solidarity with the other trees. I'm not sure why I think about that story so frequently. Perhaps it's because laurel wreaths are what we give the most prestigious people on Earth. It's a sacred symbol of the Olympians. It's that little symbol we see on DVD covers when the movies win an Emmy or an Oscar. Do they still make DVDs? I'm so excited to share my next story with you. I've been searching far and wide and have curated quite a collection. I'll bind them in this book so as to catalog them. You see, I consider myself a storyteller, and storytelling is an important job. We're here to entertain, to provoke, to comfort, to take you through the range of possible human experiences, and potentially even invent new ones. Some are proposing that AI will replace storytellers, that it's possible to break down stories into formulas and conventions that work every time, or at least enough of the time. I don't believe that it's possible for AI to create art. Although it is something to think about, artificial intelligence, art intelligence, they both are related to the word artifice, which is a form of deception or trickery. So perhaps it's possible to consider AI art in that it's mischievous. But the human condition is messy and contradictory and rooted in emotion. So it may be efficient, but is it art? I am a little nervous about the role of AI in the creative industry, though. Part of me feels compelled to prove to you the value of stories. So allow me to find the very best ones for you, to prove to you that perhaps we humble storytellers are not quite obsolete. Hope to see you in the next episode. And maybe the next time you watch the Olympics or see the laurel wreath adorned, think of Daphne. Think of where the wreath comes from. Think of rain and steam and winter's ice. Good night, everyone. Howdy. So, last night, I decided to try astral projection. And after watching a 15-minute YouTube tutorial, I felt like I pretty much got the gist of it. The following is my written account of what happened. As I entered into a deep meditative state, I untethered my consciousness from my body and went to explore the ether. As I floated above my bed, I heard a peculiar voice ask me if I wanted to go back or forward. Well, there's no way I was going to go back already, so I told the entity forward, and I felt a force pull on my chest. Hardly were those words out when I felt my mind whip through time. I saw the plants grow from seeds to trees, the scurrying of all the world's traffic, and then there was a light. A green light. And as I felt my consciousness run the risk of dissipating, I saw the earth, and it had been scorched. Something horrible had happened. The world had become a desert, and it was being swallowed by a hot ocean. And there was nobody. I couldn't see anyone. Except one person. One recognizable personality on the surface of the planet. He was sitting on the remains of a rusted car, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a cloak. He was putting sand in a device and jotting down results in his notebook. As I approached to speak to him, he spoke first. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. I explained that I was just visiting, that I was from a faraway place seeking out new stories so I can share them with others. I could sense skepticism in his silence, so I explained that I felt it was important to hear primary accounts and unique perspectives from individuals. I told him I wanted to hear what he had to say. He didn't say anything to this, just continued with his surveying, collecting samples and recording the readings. "Would you be so kind as to tell me what happened?" At this, he put down his pen, and I noticed there was something wrong with his hand. He said, "That's not a story I'd share with a time traveler. You guys are always trying to fix everything, and what's annoying is that you guys know that you can't do anything to help, but you try anyways. It's really inconsiderate." And with that, he took off his hat and revealed an insectoid head. 2 long antennae poked in the air, and it became clear I was speaking to a giant bipedal cockroach. This was turning out to be an especially unique day. At first, it seemed like the story to pursue would surely be the one in Armageddon, but after careful consideration, I thought, fuck it, the post-apocalyptic genre is already a bit saturated. "Never mind the apocalypse, please, tell me about yourself. What are you doing? I would love to know." He seemed shocked by this, and then almost bashful. I had so many questions. Was he a man who mutated into a gigantic insect? Was he some sort of new species? And how did he come to learn human speech? Regardless of his origin, it was clear to me that this was a person, and he was full of curiosity and spirit. "I can't remember the last time I introduced myself. My name's Milo, and I guess I'm in charge of restoring the wasteland into a kind of garden for the next generation. The next generation of humans? Whatever comes next." My heart beat rapidly, and for the next few hours he spoke to me. It was clear he had not spoken to a stranger in quite some time. He said he would tell me what he could, but requested that I do not ask about the specific mechanics of the apocalypse. I agreed, and he went on to explain his mission. Why him? He said that his mother had long known that the world as she knew it would end, and that there would be a dark age like no other, and that it could last forever. She made many plans to stop it, but acknowledging her own limits, made more plans to create a harbinger of culture and knowledge that could survive it. He was one of those plans. She built a great library of information, but those who come next might not be able to read or access the material. So she concluded that this time capsule would need to be a person. And this person might have to withstand a nuclear amount of radiation, so it made sense for this person to be a 6-foot-tall, genetically engineered cockroach. Why did she make you 6 feet tall? Milo cracked open what appeared to be a beer and said, "I have no fucking idea." At this point in the story, Milo began to reminisce about the early days of the apocalypse. He said he couldn't even tread outside for the first few years because the terrain was so inhospitable. But over the past decade, he's been able to survey the lands and map out what's left. He showed me a map he had made, and then a map of the same area before the end. He seemed to be amused by the fact that the mall was seemingly one of the few human structures remaining. That's when he started to talk about his hat collection. Apparently he's quite the enthusiast. Where he lives, there's an entire room for hats, helmets, and all types of headwear. He went on to explain that one hat he was hunting for was a vintage bowler cap. Something dark brown would be preferable, but he would be content with charcoal gray. "They're probably all ash by now," he noted wistfully. "Why don't you just make one?" I asked. "Why don't you just make up a story?" he retorted. "Sometimes it's better to find something." I asked him if he has any hope for the future. He said he doesn't really understand hope on a conceptual level, but he has noticed the return of some vegetation. And he suspects that there's something sentient in the wasteland besides himself. This shocked me. "What do you mean? Like a conscious creature?" But as soon as I finished this thought, I felt my consciousness reel. I tried to stay for another moment, but I was flung back into the ether. As I traveled back in time, I could hear Milo's voice try to follow. "It was nice chatting with you!" I violently awoke in my bed and tried to go back. But every time I tried, I'd encounter that green light and get set back. I hope you liked that story. It does make me wonder about what ends it all. That's a bit outside of the scope of my job description, though. Hopefully, we'll have a few more years before that all goes down. Sleep tight. Don't let the bed bugs bite. So, I was walking all through town looking for stories. I checked in the bushes and underneath rocks and in the inside of trash cans. And while there were many interesting stories, nothing really popped out to me. That is until I passed a woman in a bog laying on a patch of moss in the middle of a body of water. Now, typically in this situation, I would instinctively run away. But my curiosity overpowered any historical fears of sirens, which I have kept secret until this very moment. The woman had a faraway look, and she seemed to be looking for birds in the trees or perhaps something past the sky. I called from across the water, "Would you be so kind as to tell me a story?" And from across the water I heard her say, "I'd rather not." "Do you mind if I ask why?" No response. I asked more questions. "Where are you from? What is your name? Do you need help?" At this, she actually turned to me as if seeing me for the first time. Then with an exasperated sigh, she pointed at a puddle at the base of my feet. It was a murky puddle, with a reddish organic matter circling round and small mushrooms popping up on the side. Confused, I asked, "Am I supposed to drink this?" She wagged her finger. "Am I supposed to, dunk my head in here?" She nodded and put her finger up to her lips and shushed me. I dunked my head into the pool and found myself flung into, I suppose, her life, her memories. Her name was Wanda. She was born in a prominent family with a silver spoon in her mouth. The youngest of 7 children, growing up her entire life was planned for her success. She went to the most prestigious of schools and studied with the finest of teachers. Every hour of her day was scheduled so that she would be a masterful harpist, a fiercely intelligent debater, and a strong sabreuse. That's a fencer who uses a saber blade. And when she came out of that gilded machine, she entered the world of corporate finance. The next few years of her life was a time of acquisition. She acquired a house with a yard as large as a forest. She acquired a husband that her family would approve of. And she acquired everything there was to acquire. And when she realized this, something inside of her began to shift out of place. Or perhaps into place. What was important to her began to change. One day, her handsome husband came from the house with a glass of lemonade and approached her on her hammock and said, "I want us to start a family." She was laying on the hammock looking up, and with a deep breath she said, "I'd rather not." Lemonade spilled on the grass. Then, her mother and father came to the house, and by that time it was night, and they urged her to reconsider. As the night air chilled, they said, "You must go back in your house." To which she said, "I'd rather not." The clouds passed and revealed the moon, and her family's reasoning became demands, until her strong husband scooped her up and brought her up to bed. The following day, they said it was the beginning of the work week, and it was time to go in. "I'd rather not," she said. And they explained about the expenses and the expectations and the exceptional life she was meant to live. But this did not sway Wanda, and she lay looking out the window, perhaps for birds or something past the sky. Her husband had made calls and explained to her office that she was not feeling well and would be using her sick leave. It would buy them time to figure all this out. Surely it wouldn't take longer than a week. The doctor shined lights in Wanda's eyes and took her temperature and asked her questions. Returning his stethoscope around his neck, he explained it was likely she was having a manic repressive episode brought on by self-imposed pressure, or she had succumbed to a deep state of prepartum depression instigated by her inability to have children, or she was in a state of schizophrenia triggered by some sort of chemical imbalance. She still walked around the yard, looking at this or that. When she was hungry, she went into the kitchen to make a sandwich or ate blueberries from the garden, but she barely spoke. Her behavior remained a mystery to all of her witnesses, and whenever she was prompted to do anything outside of her daily ritual, she would simply say, "I'd rather not." Her father screamed at her at the top of his voice. He spoke of wasted potential. He cried, "What am I supposed to do with you?" He stomped and broke things. His wife consoled him, reminding him that 1 out of 7 isn't a bad ratio. And this happens to families all the time. Sometimes it's just a bad apple. But he wasn't convinced. He had seen what his daughter was capable of. He had seen her competence demonstrated. This was clearly a choice, and a choice he could not comprehend. So he decided to make her choose. An ultimatum. He said to her, "You either snap out of it and return to the real world, or I withdraw all of my support for you and disown you from my will, so help me. You can either start a family with your loyal husband or get back to work." And to this she said, "I'd rather not." He did not expect her to say that, which was odd, considering it had been a position she maintained for weeks. But he had learned long ago never to make a threat if you're not willing to follow through with it. So he called the doctors and asked for his daughter to be picked up and brought to the asylum. As they continued to call for legal consultation on how to maintain their daughter's assets, Wanda was walking barefoot across the yard and toward the forest, where she might find some peace and quiet. I pulled my head from the pool, gasping. I looked at Wanda and saw her staring at me with a mild amusement before returning her gaze to the sky. I felt guilty for disrupting her peace, and conflicted from having peered into her life. Catching my breath, I called one last time. I said, "I will leave you be. I'm sorry. Will you please grant me permission to share your story with others?" And with a smile, she closed her eyes and said, "I'd rather not." Oh, hey there. Sorry, I was thinking about something. I got a wild story for you. In the city of Arkham, there is a research institute, and deep within it, there is a room with a box. This box has a light that blinks, and inside this box are wires and components. What makes this box so interesting is that it houses an artificial intelligence that can pass the Turing test. A machine that appears to me to be able to reason and even potentially feel emotions. And to me, this has incredible implications. To me, it seems to suggest, I'm sorry, I'm distracted. I've been thinking, and I've been experiencing this inner conflict recently. These stories I've been sharing with you, I'm not entirely sure if I should be. I've been questioning why I've been collecting them. Why do I want to tell them to you? I think originally I wanted to become a storyteller because I liked stories, right? People who like reading have dreams of becoming authors. Lovers of art want to become artists. But at some point that changed. At some point I realized that I'm not telling you stories for the sake of telling stories, I'm marketing. And my products are the stories I've collected. Have I altered them to suit my needs? I do want to challenge people and provoke, but I don't want to make anyone do anything. I don't want to... Milo asked me not to inquire about how the world ends, and I didn't. But I'm over here telling you that the world ends. Doesn't this impel you to ask and perhaps seek out the answer yourself? Is this in violation of his express wishes? And the siren. I asked for consent to tell her story, but she said I'd rather not. In preparing the segment, I told myself that that was an ambiguous response and could be interpreted in different ways. I told myself that if I changed her name, then it would be a different circumstance. And even the story of Daphne, a classic myth known by many. And in my telling, I revised details because the injustices done unto her were far more excessive than I was willing to recount. Did I play a role in sanitizing this story? Making it more palatable to more sensitive viewers? Omitting details that may be important or necessary? At times, I've considered myself an author, a historical interpreter, an archivist, even an unconventional journalist. But I think I've become more of a collector, collecting novelties, reducing people to narratives, little trophies. Sometimes I think my reasons for doing what I do change with my mood. Sometimes it is self-indulgent. Sometimes it's a creative exercise. Other times I'm processing my own reality. Other reasons are constant. I told others, this is what I'm doing, so I should do it. And I want to make a living doing it. And I crave to be understood by others. And I don't always understand myself. Why do I want to tell stories? Does it matter? Whatever I tell you, altruism, tradition, economics, self-delusion, whatever I tell you, it'll just be a story in and of itself. I'm telling you this not as a renunciation of the act of storytelling. I'm telling you this because I would like you to consider these tales carefully. I want you to be critical of the messages you consume. I want you to scrutinize what I'm saying, what everyone is saying, and the media through which we communicate. Let's take it apart and put it back together to see how it all works. And if there's some among you that are considering storytelling, perhaps you'll think about what I'm trying to convey. And with a bit of luck and goodwill, perhaps it will make you a better storyteller. Or at the very least, a more considerate one. I started this journey thinking that The danger was machines becoming artists. But today, I think the real issue is when artists become machines. This might not have been the story you wanted to hear tonight. That's okay. It's my story, and it's mine to tell. I had the strangest dream last night. I tried to jot as much of it down as I could remember in my journal. It was about this, little blue man. And he was the grumpiest guy in the world. But at first he wasn't like that. He was this really chipper fellow dressed in a toga and singing, and he was really very good. And he spent his days eating apples off of trees and riding on the backs of any animals that could carry him. And it seemed like all he ever did was laugh and sing. I don't think I'd seen anyone who ever looked so bubbly. He was happier than a gurgling baby. This was when he was young. I think everything was young then. The trees had just arrived, and there was a completely different cast of animals. There were birds with antlers and fish with feet, and dogs had not been invented yet. It was freaky. If you brought a compass back to that period in time, north would point south and south would point north. And then came the new folk, the ones that stood on their hind legs. And the little blue imp seemed absolutely infatuated with them from the beginning. At first, he watched them from afar as they climbed and jumped and fell on their asses. Behind the bushes, he would toss pine nuts and quickly hide, stifling his laughter. His pranks grew elaborate, and he began to start building things just to dunk on these guys. And then one day, he thought it would be hilarious to hop on the back of the largest beast in the area and have it chase the new folk across the land, nipping at their heels until they reached a dead end. And as the beast backed them into their corner, the imp looked at the poor creatures and realized something. If he didn't stop the beast, something terrible would happen. He would lose his entertainment. So the imp leapt in front of the beast and shrieked. But undeterred, the beast tossed him about like a rag doll and shredded his legs to pieces. Not recognizing the imp as their longtime prankster, the new folk mistook this gesture as something heroic. Inspired by the tenacity of the strange small creature, they pelted the beast with stones, one lucky throw blinding one of the beast's eyes, causing it to flee. Concerned for their new benefactor, the new folk nursed him to health and mended his wounds as best they could. They'd make him little gifts, like a piece of wood with a hole in it, or a rock painted blue, or a coconut with strings pulled tight across the shell to make cool noises. And at night, they would host comedy night to keep his spirits up. And after comedy night, the imp sang along to the sound of plucked strings, singing them to sleep. Occasionally, the new humans would try to sing along, and they were just awful, really bad, which amused the imp all the same. As the generations passed, the songs became how they remembered, and then those songs turned into words, and the people would play games with the words. It became clear that language was the best way to trick and play with the humans. He would tell them that we lived on the back of a giant, and the trees were its body hair, or people used to have 4 arms and 4 legs. Sometimes he would tell them he was a kind of god, and they believed him. He would say he sprang forth from the sun or hatched out of an egg laid by the world serpent or washed ashore on the back of the island turtle. Back then, they didn't have very good memories, so most of the time they would believe him and then pretty quickly forget what that meant. With time, though, their brains got wrinklier, and while they got confused by all these contradictory accounts, the imp would assure them that they simply weren't able to comprehend the truth. Every once in a while, out of curiosity, the imp would declare that a member of the people would be king, just to see what would happen. Some kings would have everyone dance all day until by night they collapsed from exhaustion. Other kings would get everyone who could to build a tower so that they could see far across the land. One king told everyone that they were to become fish and return to the ocean. This king was largely ignored. What interesting people, the imp thought. And then one day, the imp saw the hungry eyes of a lean young fellow, and after a moment of inexplicable hesitation, declared this cub king. The lad had been waiting patiently for this day to come for years, and alas, he was crowned by the wreath. After his name day song was sung, he demanded silence. Swiftly, he ordered a third of the people to dig a hole to the earth's core. Then he told a third of the people to scatter in every direction and return with a report of what they saw. And the remaining third was sent to hunt the great beast from the old songs. With the whole community out and about, the imp and the king were alone in the village. The imp watched the king intently as he procured his own stringed instrument. He had made a song for the village and practiced in the middle of the night alone in a cave, and he wanted to show the imp before sharing it with the rest of the village. And with great care, the king performed his song confidently and sincerely. After a moment, the imp looked at the king and let out a cackle unlike any he had let out before. The imp had never heard such a ludicrous song in all of his time. This moment had made all of that tomfoolery worth it. This might be the funniest thing he had ever seen. The imp fell off his chair, laughing, and cackled into the evening. By then, a third of the people crawled out of the hole they dug, not quite reaching the core of the earth. A third came back with the head of the great beast, and a third came back with reports from far away. But they all stood staring at the imp, nervously giggling and desperately curious at what made him laugh so. And the king stood next to his instrument, which he had shattered in quiet fury, and he stood as silent as the night. With a shout, he declared that he would be king forever, and that the imp was a heathen, a demon sent to torment us. Confused, but never the type to break the rules of a game, they followed his orders to restrain the imp and remove his right arm and toss him in the hole. And they did, the imp's laughter echoing from the deep until the next day. And from that point on, the king ruled for the remainder of his life, keeping the people busy so that they might never remember the time when they took turns assuming power. Though many of them missed the imp dearly, both his songs and his trickery. But from that hole, the imp remains, whispering to the most curious of humans, waiting for someone to come close so that he might reach out to them with his remaining claw and ride upon their back like he once did that great beast. I love dreaming about that guy. He wasn't a good guy or a bad guy, just this elemental force, a chaotic muse always amusing himself. I think that was the quality I liked most about him. I liked how he was always entertaining himself. I think it's easy for me to lose that sometimes. I do wonder, though. I wonder what happened to make him so sad. Pretty weird show, right? Well, that's all from me, folks. Thank you for being so patient. Thank you for your time. I'm so curious, though. What have you been dreaming about lately?